Hollow footfalls echoing through empty corridors. The primal reaction of flesh brushed by an unseen touch. Shadowy figures slipping between the moss-covered boles of ancient trees. Strange calls issuing from not quite human throats, piercing the stillness of the night. Unusual lights and objects streaming across darkened skies. Stolen minutes and a void filled with obscure and disturbing memories. These occurrences and more are called by many whispered names in many countries around a world we believe we know so well. All of these things share a common thread. I'm Charles Romans, and welcome to the pathways leading to the shadows of legend. One day each of us will close our eyes for the final time. Our hearts will slowly cease to beat, and our last breath will whisper through silent lips as we leave this existence behind. Yet is this truly the end? Do we simply cease to be as the last spark races from our brains along cooling neurons to its final destination in oblivion? Or does the part of us that is uniquely our own continue beyond the grave? Is there existence beyond the temporal? And if so, what mysteries might that existence hold? There are those who would have us believe that our lives end with our final tomorrow, that the physical world is both our beginning and ultimate end. There are also those who reject this explanation, instead contending that the physical world is simply one aspect of an existence which may stretch on through eternity. For now, we are left to wonder if the strange apparitions are a product of our feverish minds, or if ghosts do haunt the fringes of the material world. The ultimate truth may lie somewhere between, unknown to us until we each pass beyond that veil. And between our searching eyes and that veil lies a path that leads us to the shadows of legend. Tonight we have the Cincinnati Area Paranormal Existence Research, C.A.P.E.R for short. If you wouldn't mind, introduce yourselves.
Well, I'm Joy Osborne, and I'm one of the founders.
And I'm Michelle Hale, and I'm the other founder.
What were your earliest paranormal experiences?
Well, for me, I actually lived in a house that was haunted. At the time, I didn't realize it was haunted, but I had a lot of strange occurrences that were happening, from strange noises to items being misplaced all the time, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I had two young children at the time, so it scared me, to be honest.
That's understandable.
I found a gentleman many years ago that taught me what to do, how to do it, and basically a scientific method of figuring out what was going on. And that's how I got my first taste, so to speak. And this was back in the early 90s.
For me, I grew up around ghost stories my entire life. Honestly, I don't remember a time where I didn't hear ghost stories from my family. The one that really sticks in my mind the most is a story that my dad told me my entire life, where he came home one night. He was drunk, which most people would say, oh, he was drunk, he was just seeing things. But my grandfather actually confirmed this story years later to my mom. My dad came home drunk. He came up the steps, and a rocking chair that used to belong to his grandmother started rocking all by itself. And she showed up, and she looked him in the eye and said, Michael, you should be ashamed of yourself coming home in this condition. My grandfather woke up, saw it, and as soon as my grandmother woke up, it disappeared. So I've had that story. My mom would tell me stories, and I just kind of gravitated towards ghost stories my entire life. And one day I remember I was watching a show called Ghost Hunters, and I remember thinking, holy cow, they really do this stuff. I got to find somebody that I can do this with. And through a website called Meetup, funny enough, I actually met a group of people, and C.A.P.E.R was born. And then a couple of years later, I met Joy.
Well, now that sounds like some pretty interesting background. One question I will ask you, though, you say your family always telling ghost stories. So did your family at least have an open mind toward the paranormal in general?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, honestly, I've never heard anybody in my family ever say ghosts don't exist. Everybody in my family that I know, we all believe.
Now, does that help you or hurt you when you're looking for evidence of the paranormal?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't, maybe a little bit of both.
Okay.
I'm very open-minded, but I am also skeptical. I don't just believe right off the bat that because I heard a noise that it's a ghost. I do tend to look more for the reason why it happened rather than just leaping to conclusions.
I think that's a practical way of going about it. So now, speaking of how you go about things, from start to finish, what's a typical investigation for you? What does that entail?
Well, first, somebody would call us, contact us through either our website or an email or by phone, and we listen to their story. What's going on? What brought them to want to talk to us? From there, we may give them some advice, some things they can do in the meantime that, might simmer things down for them. If that's not the direction they want to go, then what we'll do is we'll go out and meet them first and go to the home and hear their stories again, and for them to show us where in the house things are happening.
Okay.
And we're still not even at an investigation yet. We're still in the early stages of meeting them. And I have a background in real estate and construction.
Okay.
So I always tease people and say, you're getting a whole house inspection for free. Is what's happening.
Sometimes humor puts people at ease.
It's true. So we have some equipment that will go through just some basic things. One is an EMF meter that measures the magnetic field. So a lot of the times, just high fields will cause people to see and hear things if they're sensitive to that sort of thing. So we'll kind of look for things like that. Knocking in the wall could just be as simple as a loose pipe that needs a 50-cent little piece there to hold that pipe steady, water pipe steady, or something like that. So we'll go through and we'll talk to them about that. And if they still want to move forward, then that's when we actually have an investigation. And during that time, before the investigation, we'll have them fill out, basically keep a journal. What's going on? What time of day is it happening? What day is it happening on? And as much detail as they can give us. And, from there, an investigation would be scheduled, and we'll start that process, and that can take up to 4 hours. So it's something that I don't take lightly in doing because it is disruptive to their lives. So you have to weigh which is worse, this haunting that you have happening that you can't figure out, or do you want us in here in your house with cameras and all these meters going through your house? So,
well, to back up just a second there, it might be useful to the listeners to, if you wouldn't care to explain the value of keeping a journal as far as times of day when things happen or certain areas of the house. What benefit is that?
Well, for instance, one case that I had, the incident would happen the same time every day. So if someone was keeping a journal, they could say, okay, at 7:30 at night, I'm always hearing this noise or smelling this smell, or I'm seeing a shadow, something like that. So sometimes when it's a repeated pattern, then what we potentially could have is, if you come at this with the belief that, we are all energy.
Yes.
Then we have an energy input that we're putting on the home. So every day you get up, you fix your coffee, you have your breakfast, you go to work. You've got that same physical path in your home. Well, somebody who's sensitive to energy, you've left an imprint there, and somebody can bump into that imprint, think they have a haunting, and they've just have a sensitivity to that energy imprint. So the case I'm referring to is somebody who basically would see somebody getting shot.
I see.
So they heard the noise. They would see a shadow, and it happens, I'd say, at least once a week, the same time. Well, come to find out after our investigation, and then we delve into history, so news articles, police reports, anything like that we can, and of course, going through the history of the land and the property ownership. We had found out that on that property, someone did get shot by their boyfriend. They weren't killed. The person was still alive, but they were in a wheelchair.
I see.
So we believe that person that was sensitive, and they were bumping into that event that happened.
I see, kind of like a piercing time or something.
Another good thing about keeping a journal or something is that we can see what time of day things are happening. So we don't want to be in the house at midnight if they are experiencing something every day at 10 a.m. There's going to be no point in us being there when they're not having activity. So we could actually go and schedule an investigation at the time where they're actually experiencing things and try to figure out what's going on.
So it helps you to focus the investigation then.
Right.
Now, I should ask, do you have any other particular investigations that stick out in your mind as what you would think was very successful or very terrifying, for instance?
Yeah, actually, there's one of our first investigations, actually. We were set up in a house in a residential area, and we always have what we call base. So we pick one part of the building that we're in. That's where we have our cameras, where we monitor the cameras and we see what's going on. We keep a recorder there. And that's where, when we switch up teams, whatever team is not actively investigating, the other team is sitting at the table waiting at base. So we did the investigation, and we're doing what we call evidence review. And as we go back and we listen to all of our recordings, we watch the cameras, we see what we can find. During evidence review, we had an EVP, which is electronic voice phenomena. It's something that is captured on a recorder, but at the time, the people who are there don't hear it. It can be a knock, a noise, a voice, music, can be any kind of sound. So this particular EVP that we captured, we take it back to the owners of the house and we're playing it for them. The EVP says, "There's a stranger by the fire." And there's a second voice that says, "Uh-huh." So it turns out that when we take this evidence back to the homeowners, we show them, they've listened to it. They said, "Well, that's really strange. Where did you get that?" And I said, "Well, it was at base, actually." And they said, "Well, right where your base was, that's where the stove of the house used to be."
I see.
Where their kitchen was, that had been an add-on. So years ago, right where we were sitting at base, there was a fire. And so the voice says, "There's a stranger by the fire." So what makes it even a little bit more spooky, I happen to be sitting at base by myself right at that particular time.
And you heard nothing?
I heard nothing. So one of the things that's interesting is that we always keep a recorder at base. So if I would have heard something, we tag it, what we call tag. So anytime we hear a noise, we would say the time and then what the noise is, so that we can rule those things out as we're doing our evidence review. You can plainly hear on the recording, I say nothing after that. That's one of the first really interesting investigations that we had.
In your opinion, what type of hauntings are there? I know this is a general question, but if you don't care to break it down a little bit for our listeners here, the different types of activity, we should say, we won't say haunting, but activity that you can find in an investigation.
Well, the different types are ones where, for instance, they just, you have knocks. A lot of times there's footsteps. So that's type of one. It could be what we call a residual. So people are hearing things that happened in the past and they just keep replaying that noise. Sometimes there are other types where they're active in the sense that they open and close cabinet doors. They will move items. They like moving little things like your keys. You may set your keys down. Say maybe you've got a little table by your front door and you set them there all the time. And the next thing you know, you find your keys in the refrigerator. So I think they like to pay some of them like to pay little jokes on it. And then there are some that are just downright, they're ornery. And, I've been doing this a long time, and we've never ran into what they'll say on the TV shows is, demons or it's evil. What you have is if a person was nasty in life and they decided they weren't going to move on when they died, their spirit's going to be nasty and they may choose not to move from the house and move on. So that's how we don't actually, categorize them as, something like that. Something as like a devil or evil or anything like that. So that's where we're a little bit different than other organizations.
So of these, I noticed when you were talking about the noises and footsteps and things like that happening at a certain time all the time, I would think that the journal would help you to pinpoint that and verify some things with it.
That's exactly right. I was going to say some people see shadows, that aren't fully, they may just be an outline of a person. Again, that's potentially all the same. It can be somebody who is nasty in life, or it could just be someone who decided, you know what, I'm a little scared. I'm not going to move on, and I'm just still hanging out here. But people will perceive seeing something dark as being potentially, bad or evil, and that's not necessarily the case.
Okay, well, you see that would play into the possibility of how for instance, the homeowner would react if they thought something
correct
that was there that was demonic. Obviously, they're going to be much more terrified than, I hate to say, just a ghost.
Right.
But a human spirit wouldn't typically have as much negative energy as something that began as negative energy.
Exactly.
And so what would you explain? What would you recommend, rather, to a person who thought that they were having paranormal activity in their home? What would be the first reaction that you would advise?
Well, the first thing I tell people is don't be yelling at it. Don't be cussing it out and
antagonistic.
Yeah, don't provoke it. I tell people this: if that was your grandmother who passed and somebody is yelling at her, wouldn't you find that as being rude?
Definitely.
Or insulting? So if that's the type of spirit you got there, they're going to find that it's going to upset them more. So we're trying not to upset them. We're trying, I look at it this way. We are the caretakers of the property that we're living in for a very short time. And this spirit, for whatever reason, may be here a very long time.
Oh, this is true.
So I say treat everything with respect and dignity. So that's number one. And number two is give them some ground rules. You can talk right out into the thin air and say, look, I have small children here. Don't be slamming the doors or appearing to anybody. You can do that when we're physically not here. You give them ground rules.
Yeah. In fact, I remember one time we went on a consultation to a house. A woman told us about these noises she was hearing, knocks, footsteps. We went on the consultation. We talked to her. We listened about what was going on. We actually gave her that advice.
Yes.
Talk to them. tell them, look, I know we all live here. I get it. I know you're here. I'm not going to bother you. You don't bother me, but I need you to back off. And we set an investigation date, and she actually called, I don't know, a few days later after the consultation and said, I don't need you to come. I talked to them. I did what you said. I told them, we're sharing the space, and I gave them some rules, and they don't bother me anymore, so I don't need you to come. So
that's a good resolution then.
Exactly.
And on the subject of resolution, what happens when you have, we'll say, a spirit that's inordinately obnoxious and the family wants it gone? How do you proceed with something like that?
Well, a spirit doesn't, if it doesn't want to go, it's not going to.
I see.
We have to find a way to learn to live with it. And again, of course, giving it the ground rules. Now, some people feel better by doing a smudging, which is, lighting sage and going through and what they call clearing out the house.
Yes.
But I always caution people when they do things like that, because, for instance, if the negative spirit, say, was a devout Christian.
Okay.
And now you've lit some sage and tried to clear them out, you could make them more angry because they find that in itself being something that's evil.
The perception of the spirit itself is something that has to be considered. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. I mean, we had one investigation where it was an old farmhouse, and the people were remodeling the farmhouse. And a lot of times when you remodel, you kind of wake them up. They maybe aren't too thrilled about your remodeling. They don't like that you're changing their house. But so they had some minor things, knocks and footsteps, kind of the traditional, as I put it, quote unquote, type of hauntings. But what changed for them was they had some teenage kids who decided they were going to pull out the Ouija board. Now, personally, I just think that's a game made by Milton Bradley. But to this family, this husband and wife spirit, that was, in itself a horrible thing. It was, in their opinion, they took it as almost like maybe that was a devil's game.
I see.
And so they got angry about that. And for them, they then projected things happening to the workers that were there. There was one gentleman who was working on a light, and they were poking on him. Well, of course, that scared him, like would anybody, and he fell off the ladder. He wasn't pushed, but some people would perceive that he was, but he got startled. They scared him. They just wanted everybody out of their home because the children had started doing the thing with the board. So sometimes we have to dig a little deeper and ask the questions from the people, the owners. Well, what's changed? It was okay and you were fine with it, but then what made it go worse? Well, eventually the teenagers told us what they were doing. And so we just have to deduce then that's what, that they were just got more angry about that. So we basically had to tell the kids, you need to put the board away, like get rid of the board and apologize to those spirits for offending them and that they did not mean to do that and they would never play with that game again. They did what we said and they didn't have any more problems after that.
Again, that seems to be a good resolution to a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, are there any other specific instances that come to mind where the actual living humans have annoyed the departed humans to the point where it caused bad blood, as it were?
Well, we have another one it's a little different. It's a local restaurant.
I see.
That it doesn't annoy them, I guess I should say, the people there. But we found it quite interesting how the spirits reacted to us and would answer our questions. A lot of times we don't get direct answers. So on this particular one, I know one of our investigators had asked, did you own this place? That's one of our standard questions. And later on, playing back the evidence we've got on the recorder, it said, not this place. So he was directly answering, our investigator. Then we have another one, it's the same place where we were, he was looking for a high EMF field, and he had said something in that regards to that, and then there was another answer that says, well, it's right above it. Like they were trying to tell him where to look.
so this was actually a helpful spirit then, or attempted
that
to
one
be
was
helpful.
being helpful, and it could have been multiple for all we know. Because sometimes you can't distinguish if they're male or they're female. So, of course, the restaurant owners thought it was absolutely hilarious, and they always talk to their spirits, and they think it's a good thing. So,
so they've reached an accommodation, and they're okay with their business being haunted.
Yeah, everybody's fine with it. So.
Now, has there been any investigations where you personally felt threatened?
I have never felt threatened. You do get those investigations where you feel the typical hair goes up on the back of your neck type thing, where you can't quite figure out what's going on. But I would never... I can say in all the investigations we have ever done and have ever done that I've never once felt threatened.
Yeah, in fact, we joke about it when we train new investigators, that the one thing they are not to do is run away. And I would say every one of our investigators will run to the noise, run to the area, because they're not going to physically hurt you. And I know, again, that's something where we're different than a lot of the groups. It is our own mental state that causes, say, the injury, the fall. Now, have we seen things move or hit us? Yeah, I've had a book fall off a shelf and hit me. But I think that was more of, hey, I'm getting your attention. Mm-hmm. You're in my space and you've upset me. So, we've had touches, maybe a little hair tug, but we're asking them to do that,
Yes.
Touch us on their shoulder, so, but nothing. That's why I tell, your fear is something that they can feed on.
Right.
So we try, as hard as it may be when you're in the middle of the throes of living with this,
yes,
that you need not to be fearful.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that a fear reaction might actually feed them, as you say, but engender another reaction that causes even more fear to perpetuate this?
Yes. Well, you think about this. If you are the angry pants spirit, if you're the negative one that gets your jollies off aggravating these people, it just kind of keeps feeding it. The spirit's enjoying doing it, so they're going to keep doing it. You get a little more excited, they get a little, and it just feeds upon itself. So it's trying to also break that cycle is what it's trying to do.
Yeah, you can think about it something like this. Say you're sitting out somewhere.
Okay.
It doesn't matter where, just anywhere. And all of a sudden somebody goes running by you screaming.
Yes.
You don't know why they're doing that, but what's your first instinct?
Is to...
You're scared. You're going to jump up. You're going to run with them because you don't know what's going on. So you want to get out of the way of whatever it is. Well, that's the same thing as when you start to see something or you feel like you see something. Your heart gets racing and you fight or flight. You're going to run. You're going to try. So as Joy said, it feeds on that fear, and then you get more afraid, and then your adrenaline kicks in, and then you all of a sudden you're running down the hall and you trip over a book.
Right.
Or you trip over a pair of gym shoes and now you've hurt yourself. Well, what are you going to say? Well, I was running from a ghost. Well, no, you were probably running because your flight or fight kicked in.
Now, on the other hand, do you think that a calm reaction would help to calm the energies in a house of that nature and make the response more calm?
That's definitely what I agree with. When we're doing these initial interviews with the families, it's one of the areas of questions that I ask them is there essentially chaos going on in the family? If it's, husband and wife, are they fighting? Do they have maybe teenage children who are, whatever, so it is one of the questions that we ask them about their situation, their home life. Because, some of those spirits, like we said before, they love that energy and it makes them stronger and it makes them keep going. And they like the fact that they've created all this turmoil.
Which perpetuates what they wanted to begin with.
Exactly.
Now, a lot of people, and again, we can blame Hollywood, but a lot of people's basic concept of what is a ghost is like the spirit rattling the chains and moaning, something like Marley out of A Christmas Carol.
Mm-hmm.
So what, in your opinion, is a basic interaction with a ghost?
Honestly, there's no one thing. It can be anything. One of my houses that I lived in, I had the attic room, a dormer room.
Yes.
And my brother, he would tell me all the time, I hear footsteps in your room when you're not here. I hear the stereo come on. I hear thumps. I hear things. That's something. It could be as little as you walk out of the room and where you had put your keys 1 minute, now they're not there the next. It could be a sound. It could be a smell. People report smelling cigar smoke or someone's favorite perfume. It can be a bigger thing with a full body manifestation where you're actually looking straight into the face of a spirit. So there's no real common, I guess, way to say it.
I think the seeing a shadow out of the corner of your eye, that's a real big one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think back, okay, if I'm a quote unquote spirit and I'm curious as to what this person is doing in my house, I may be, fleeting looking or something like that. And the way that person would perceive me would be maybe a little brief gray shadow.
I see.
And not really. So that one's really common. Anytime we have anything where people are walking through walls, so to speak, again, I go back to my construction knowledge. Was there a doorway there? So is that, again, a loop of that person walking through that doorway? I always, go back to our normal routines that we do every day. You get up, you make a cup of coffee, and you do that over 30 years as you're working. You've put an energy imprint in that area. So sometimes it's just, that's a really common one that some people are just sensitive to those energy imprints and can pick up on them. And that's another thing. They don't realize they're sensitive. And sometimes we have to kind of help them deal with that. And therein lies the people who eventually can be psychics or mediums or whatever you would like to call them. Because I do think there are spirits out there who are trying to contact someone for whatever reason it may be. And those people that are sensitive are like I kind of use an analogy like they're a lighthouse. And that spirit's like, oh, wait a minute, there's somebody there I might be able to get my message across to. And then that's when they have activity. We had one investigation where that was exactly what had happened. And it took many times doing an investigation in this house, but I'll try and boil it down to a real short. So the people contacted us because the wife was always being awoken by her bed being shaken.
I see.
And her husband was a psychic. It ran in his family, and even his brother was a well-known psychic out in California. But they couldn't figure it out. Neither one of them could figure it out. Well, after, again, like I said, many times going out to the house, and eventually what happened, what we figured out, and this time we did eventually have to find another a psychic. It was the last resort. But what had happened was the woman worked with someone that her brother had died in a fire. And the brother and the mother lived together. And the mother almost died too, but she got out of the house. What had happened was the brother and the family, they blamed him for this fire. And what had happened was he didn't start the fire. He did die in the fire, but his spirit is what woke up the mom. And he wanted them to know, yes, you guys thought I was a loser and I caused this. I didn't cause it, but I saved mom. And he needed the wife to tell that to her friend, her work friend.
So he needed some sort of closure.
He needed the closure. He wanted that family to desperately know that he didn't start it, and he saved mom, because the whole family blamed him. And to back up a little further on that, the husband, his sister had just passed, and she was the one who brought the gentleman through, so to speak. So we initially had the haunting where they thought it was her, but it wasn't. So, we don't know exactly what happens over there on the other side, but we felt like it took probably a year and a half for us to get down to that portion of the, story to kind of wrap it all up. But once it got to that point in the story, and the wife eventually explained this to the workmate, and she was saying, how do I explain this to her? I said, I don't know how to tell you to do. But once it had happened and she did speak to her about it, the bed shaking stopped, and they never had any more problems in the house.
So based on that, you can say that there are some spirits that are there, but they don't want to be there. They would just as soon go on and move on in the next step of existence.
Right.
So do you think these happen, like in this case, because these spirits need the assistance of someone living to make that transition?
Yes. In that case, that was definitely one that they needed. They needed someone to get that message to that family. And it was odd how it all happened, but like I said, the message was eventually given to that family member, and then that family didn't have any more issues.
Now, do you have any similar experience to that you would like to share?
Well, when I first started in this, in my own house that I had at that time, there was a gentleman who passed away in my house, and he had a mental disability, and everybody in the neighborhood knew him, and we'll call him Robert, what I affectionately called him, once I started learning how to deal with everything. And he would move things. He liked to move. My keys were especially something he loved to move and hide from me. And one of the noises that I heard, it was a 3-story home, and one of the noises I would always hear was, it went kabunk, 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 and was on my 3rd floor all the time. Well, I looked into my gutters. At first, I thought, well, maybe it was birds in the box gutters and things like that. Always trying to rule out something.
Right.
Well, I ended up talking to somebody. We were only like the 3rd people who owned the house, but it was always in this one family. And my children at the time, they're grade school. And one of the counselor at the school came up to me. He said, "Hey, I hear that you bought my family's home." And I'm like, "Oh, yes." He goes, "Oh, some of my best memories was playing ping pong. We'd have ping pong matches on the third floor." So that gave me the idea of that's the noise that I'm hearing. I'm hearing them playing the ping pong games. Now, most of the people are still alive in the family. So, that was one of them. And like I said, I would affectionately say to Robert, "Please stop playing the ping pong game. It is now 1 a.m. We all must sleep."
That would be a trifle inconvenient, wouldn't it?
Yes, yes. And in that house, like, we always smelled SpaghettiOs. Is what it always smelled like in our kitchen all the time. And I found out from down the street, there was one of those little tiny corner grocery stores. And the kids would go down there and get their little penny candy. And the gentleman said, "Oh, you bought that family's home." He said, "Oh, Robert would come down here every day and buy his can of SpaghettiOs."
Which explains a lot.
Well, then I'm like, that's what I was smelling all the time in the house. So we learned to live with each other. My guess is that he just didn't realize that he was supposed to move on. What eventually happened was one day the school had called and my daughter was hurt at school. And where I always laid my keys, I couldn't find them. And of course, I'm getting worried. I've got to get up to the school. I've, got to take care of my kid. And I remember yelling in the middle of the parlor, "Robert, I need my keys and I need them now. My daughter's hurt." And I hear a ting, and I put them in a bowl by my back door on the counter. And I hear that noise of keys being dropped in that bowl, and I run in there, and there they are. They're right there in the bowl, but not 5 minutes earlier, they weren't in there.
So that by it being an emergency, it necessitated a favorable response.
Right. But after that, I never heard anything else. I never smelled any smells. I never had anything else move. Never heard any more noises. And so I felt, in a way, kind of bad that I had to yell at him to do that. But again, it was the heat of that moment. So I think maybe he either figured out I need to move on or I'm aggravating those people and I need to stop. So
now, has there been any cases, I won't say failed cases, but has there been any cases that you haven't got the resolution that you'd hoped for?
We had, was another home up in the Dayton area. Mm-hmm. And, we've been back there a few times, and the people have just learned that they're just going to deal with these noises and sounds and just live with them the best that they can. But it's one that where, they've tried everything that we've, told them. They don't believe in mediums or psychics, so they don't want anyone like that to come in. But, to this day, they still have the footsteps, the door slamming, and things like that. And they're just willing to keep going along with it. So, but they haven't, we haven't been able to, I guess, get it to stop. So,
yeah, I think, one of the biggest, I don't know exactly how I want to say it. One of the missions for us, I guess is the best way to say it, is to make somebody who is scared of living in their home or being in their business to be more at ease. So however we do that, whether it is ruling out things that they're hearing or things that they're seeing by saying to them, "Oh, look, if you, the reason that you see that light going across your room every day at 3 a.m. is because your neighbor comes home from his work shift and the light shines through your window. Or if it's the fact that we can say, like Joy referenced earlier, oh, that banging that you're hearing, that's your water pipe. All you have to do is screw it down and you won't hear that anymore. So however we can make someone feel at ease, we feel like we've done our job. So even if it is where we say, okay, look, we came in, we found these noises, these things we can explain, these things we can't. But we will tell you that we never once felt like we were being threatened. We never felt like it's anything bad. So if you can live with this, then you'll be okay.
Yeah, some people just want confirmation that they're not crazy.
Well, I could see where that would be a major motivation right there, because you're seeing things that aren't quote unquote normal. You don't want to think that you are deficient yourself.
Right. That is probably one of the biggest things. They just want confirmation of what they're seeing and hearing, and they're not, losing it in some way. Almost every phone call starts with, well, you might think I'm crazy, but, it's just...
And we always laugh and we say, look, you're calling people who sit in the dark and talk to things that aren't there. We don't think you're crazy.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't think that you could be a paranormal researcher and be exceptionally judgmental. So,
no.
You'd have to be at least a little open-minded. But I'm going to ask you an open-ended question here, and you can feel free to answer this however you choose to. Why do you think people see ghosts?
Oh, that is an open-ended question. There's a very large variety of reasons why. One would be that there is an environmental factor. In fact, we had a case once where somebody told us that every day while she was standing there in the bathroom drying her hair, she would see somebody stand up behind her.
Yes.
And what we ended up figured out is that the hair dryer was putting off a large amount of EMF, and it was making her see things that weren't really there. So it was an environmental factor. And that, we told her, dry your hair somewhere else. We promise you won't see anything again. Took care of that. We also had a couple who were experiencing just all kinds of different things. The husband would wake up in the middle of the night with seizures. They would have, actually, I think she might have been the one that was the hair dryer as well.
She might have been. But they had in their bedroom, and they had been to doctors and couldn't figure out why he was having these seizures, and they felt it was all paranormal based. Well, what we found when we were going through their home was where they slept, there was very high EMF field, and there was, in like a lot of us, we have, the clock radio on one side, they had like a noise machine on the other side of the bed, they had a TV across the room, and all three of those devices with their electric field was causing a really high field in the middle where he was sleeping. And they removed one of those, I think we put their bed on a different wall so it would break that cage effect.
Yes.
And he stopped having his seizures, and their ghost, quote unquote, stopped. But the interesting thing on that case was one of the after effects was that we kind of said in passing, and we didn't say it to them right away. So he goes to have this first seizure, but something woke her up about it.
Yes.
Just in time before he actually had it. So she was already awake and was able to grab the phone right away and call 911. But one of the things that we said, a lot of our investigators were smelling mustard. And we were just saying it to them in conversation as we're finishing up with their evidence review. And the fella leans back and he goes, funny you should say that. My grandfather was a connoisseur of all types of mustard. So So, and they had just brought in the grandfather clock that he had left for them.
Yes.
And so, they felt like he was there. He's the one who woke her up. So she could be, got prepared, so to speak, for that seizure that eventually led them down the path to where, we figured out what was causing the seizures for him. Because after we kind of moved things around and told him different things to do, environmentally, it stopped. So that he never had any more seizures after that and was able to go off of his medication eventually. So,
yeah. And that kind of leads into another thing. Another reason why people might see a spirit is something medical or an emergency or something that they need to know. So it could be a loved one that's reaching out who is already, who's already passed on. And they may be trying to get their attention. Hey, I need you to go to the doctor. You're sick. Or, hey, pay attention. You're about to run a stop sign and get T-boned. Or any of those things. So it could be a voice you hear in your head. Could be the scent again. Gosh, I've been smelling Mom's perfume lately. I wonder what that's all about. And well, she only wore that perfume when, I don't know. So, and it could lead you to, down a path and then like, oh, I really should do A or B or whatever. I think another reason could be comfort. A loved one can come back to comfort someone who may be grieving desperately. And so the loved one comes back to show them that they're okay, to ease the mind of the person. And sometimes that helps.
Well, now for the other open-ended question. Why do you think ghosts communicate with people who are still living?
I would say a lot of the same reasons we just talked about. And it also could be something that, somebody doesn't know, or somebody's afraid to move on, that they don't know what's on the other side of the light. So, or they had something that was left unsaid when they did move on or when they passed over, and they're reaching out, trying to get that last thing completed, accomplished.
I think sometimes it's also the individual may feel that they can't move on because of maybe their religious beliefs. Maybe they felt like they were such a bad person in the life that, with their belief system, maybe they're going to go to hell. And so they are just terrified to get in any kind of light. And so they're kind of stuck, or they miss their window of opportunity.
And that makes perfect sense, because if you thought that you were on the road to hell, you definitely wouldn't want to get on the bus.
Right. You're not getting on that bus. You're going to stay. It's funny. I have one EVP that happened early on in my career, and the EVP comes back and it says, the church lied. Now, I don't know anything what they were referencing to in the sense of their particular religion, but it's something that always kind of stuck with me.
It's quite a cryptic statement.
Yeah.
Without context, it could be used to imply anything. Actually.
Now, and this is probably a train derailment here, but I have a little bit of a belief. And this is the scientific part of it in my brain,
okay,
that I think there's certain times of year or certain atmospheric things that can happen that kind of like maybe make it easier for our loved ones to kind of come back to us to say, hey, we're okay. I've been studying when we have solar flares, whether or not those hitting the earth, is there an increase in paranormal activity then? I don't have a definitive, answer yet, but it's an area that I'm looking into. One of the things they talk about also is a full moon. Mm-hmm. If the moon, when it's full, can affect the tides, and it can affect people.
Yes.
Well, can it affect the spirits from kind of coming through? I don't know. Again, it's another one of those questions that I always, again, when we do investigations, it's one of the other areas that we mark down. What kind of like what's going on with the weather? You know, do we have solar flares going on? Do we have a low or high barometric pressure? Same thing, you know, where's the moon at in its phase? Again, just another one of those things that makes me think. You know, I have a different belief that a lot of investigators think that it all has to do with AC current. Well, I believe differently. I believe it's DC current because that's what we're made of. So why not look at those areas and see if there's a correlation there? Don't know. Jury's still out on that one.
Well, you know, it stands to reason that if you can't affect the normal operation of anything, then you can, I guess, subvert it. And in the case of spirits, they could become stronger or weaker during certain times of the year or during, like you said, weather phenomena, things like that. Mm-hmm. The ancient Celts believed that during the solstices, that kind of veil between the dimensions, for lack of a better way of putting it, was weaker, so that the spirits could cross back and forth.
Right. Yeah. Again, another good reason why to keep a log and date and time of when you're having things happen. Maybe you'll see a pattern.
Now, if someone is having an experience and they want you to investigate it, what is the best way for them to reach you?
Well, we have a few different ways.
Okay.
Our phone number is 513-800-0266, or as we like to say, 513-800-0-BOO, B-O-O. We also have a website. It's C.A.P.E.R, C-A.P.E.R, .mysite, mysite.com. And we are also on Facebook.
Now, do you have a preferred method?
No, whatever the person feels most comfortable. Some people like to write it down. They don't want to actually talk to somebody right away. Some people like to call and just kind of spill their guts, so to speak. So whatever the person feels most comfortable with is how we would like them to contact us.
What reaction would you recommend when someone thinks, okay, this is beyond a creaking house, there's something going on? What's your initial advice to them? Obviously, you have to research, but what's the initial advice going into this?
Well, the first thing I tell them is like we've discussed before, don't yell. Don't curse at them. Don't do anything that's antagonistic. Yeah. I tell them to just politely ask them to stop. Maybe even say, we have children in the house. Please be quiet. Give them ground rules. Give and spell it out. Mm-hmm. And maybe even give that spirit an outlet. Like, you can do what you need to do when we're not home. And we're not home between 8 and 6, So initially, that's what I tell people to do. Give them ground rules, ask them not to do it, and do all of it politely.
Yeah, and one of the things, when someone reaches out to us, one of the first questions we ask them is, what do you want us to do? Because the reason that we do that is we want to make sure that they don't have higher expectations than what we are able to do. And what I mean by that is, if they call us and they say, well, I want them out, I want you to come in, I want you to get rid of them. Well, we don't do that. So we just let them know, here's what we can do. We can come in, we can see if there's some other reason why you are experiencing things, if it's something environmental, etc. But we can't do that.
Yeah, I don't believe there's anyone out there that can make a spirit go who does not want to go.
Right.
Again, you can politely ask them to. So if one doesn't want to go, they're not going to.
Well, I mean, that would seem to make logical sense. In some things of spirit, you can't physically, forcibly remove it. It would be difficult at best, I would think.
Right. And there, as my father would say, there are people for that.
So...
And we can, if there is an extreme case, we can, find people that can do that. But again, I always caution, because if we are not correct in our choice, it could make it worse. So let's figure out, as I like to say, the peaceful way to deal with it first.
And that would seem to be sound advice to me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is there anything else that you would like to add at this time?
I think probably in general, we pretty well, covered at least all the basics.
I think one last thing I think I would just like to say is that if there's somebody out there who feels like there's something going on and they're scared or they feel like they're crazy or whatever, that's what we're here for. We can give you advice on to how to check to see if maybe your pipe is rattling or, it's a car light bouncing off your mirror or things like that. And to understand that there are those of us out here who have had experiences, who don't think you're crazy, who are very open-minded to come to your house and say, look, we understand, we've been here. Everybody that we've ever had on our team, we all had our individual experiences. And we're very sympathetic to people who are scared by something that might be happening. And as I said before, one of the best things that we feel like we've done our job is if we can help somebody not be scared anymore.
Yeah, we like to say more than investigate, we educate.
Well, I would like to thank you both for taking the time to talk to me and sharing your stories with the public here. And hopefully we will talk again soon. And maybe you can bring in some other cases and we can go through those step by step and give people a boots on the ground play by play.
There you go, Charlie. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a great time. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure talking to you as well. And you have a wonderful evening.
This is Charles Romans, and on behalf of myself and our guests, thank you for joining us on this walk through the shadows of legend. If you like what you heard, please follow us and visit our website at shadowsoflegend.com and support our Patreon page to help keep the content flowing. And if you would like to be a guest and share your own brush with a stranger paranormal, don't hesitate to email us and include a contact number. The strange and surreal, the normal and the paranormal are all aspects of the world in which we live. As you reflect upon the stories we have shared, keep in mind that the people sharing these stories are actual, real people just like us. Were the stories shared compelling enough to be given credibility, or should they be relegated to the deeper part of the shadows? But when determining this, it might be a good idea to keep an open mind, because when we look around, we might discover that our own world is less brightly lit than we once thought. Until next time, I'll be waiting for you in the shadows of